14 Bannerman Road is where Sarah Jane Smith lives.
And 14 Bannerman Road is the name of my podcast about it. This time, The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith, Parts 1 and 2, both written by Gareth Roberts, who's previously written Invasion of the Bane, Revenge of the Selene, and Secrets of the Stars, as well as episodes that feature a particular recurring villain. Ooh. And they were directed by Joss Agnew, who's directed many episodes before, but this is his first one that's been written by Gareth Roberts, except, I think, a comic relief special that I sort of glossed over because it's not really canon. I think it was really just a chance to make some jokes, and they're not really going to refer back to it. Part 1 was first broadcast on the 29th of October 2009, and so of course Part 2 was first broadcast the next day on the 30th of October 2009. I'm very excited about this one. If you listened to the last episode, you'll know why. So I'm going to get right into it. Clyde does his usual 13 Bannerman Road spiel, and then we go straight to titles, no cold open. Sarah Jane is going out. She says goodbye to Luke. She says goodbye to K9. Before she can even get out the front door, Luke is activating Mr. Smith quickly and quietly, which proves that his usual fanfare is a deliberate choice on his part, which is pretty great. And he's still quite creaky and loud, though. It's weird. He's quite inconsistent in when the whole wall slides up, and sometimes it's really creaky, and I quite like the sound of that. I just like the sound of machines whirring to lift this big chunk of brick up and out of the way. But, yeah, Luke phones up somebody and says she's off again. So he's basically activated Mr. Smith to track Sarah Jane and see where she's going. It's revealed that he's on the phone to Rani, who comes over the road with Clyde, and Luke gets Mr. Smith to activate the tracking device that he's put on Sarah Jane's car in a little wheel arch we see. She said that she was going out to a meeting about motorway extensions or something, but even K9 basically calls that out as implausible. They say that this is the 5th time that this has happened in a month, and Mr. Smith agrees that that's weird, so that's why he's okay with the tracking device. K9 basically tells them to shut up because they've got a rivalry going on. Sarah Jane reaches her destination. She goes to apply some lipstick. She almost sonics herself in the face before pulling out the real lipstick. I love her. That's a brilliant little scene. And K9 does a scan, doesn't pick up any alien activity. Mr. Smith gets a bit annoyed that Clyde didn't ask him to scan because he's perfectly capable of scanning, thank you very much. You know, that's what their relationship is going to be now. It's going to be Mr. Smith versus K9. And so they've tracked Sarah Jane to where she has gone, which is nowhere near the town hall where she said she was going. And so they go and see what she's up to, leaving K9 and Mr. Smith to argue. So she's gone to a cafe, Sarah Jane. They spot her in the cafe, the gang, all peering through the window. And they see her smooching a man. And they are equal parts entertained and grossed out. We hear a very familiar vorp sound. That's the official onomatopoeia for it. The gang don't really acknowledge it, so I'm unsure if they hear it, but Clyde looks like he might have just heard something and doesn't really know what it was. Clyde says that nobody over 22 should kiss in public, and then Ronnie basically says, look, shut up, Clyde. Let's pretend we didn't see any of this, okay? It's nothing harmful. So Sarah Jane will probably come and tell us when she's ready. Let's all just go back to the attic and, pretend it never happened. So Sarah Jane returns home to find the gang all trying way too hard to be nonchalant and just pretend that they're revising for exams. Ronnie grabs a book, she holds it upside down for a minute and then just quickly trying to flip it around and just be like, no, we're just revising, doing nothing suspicious at all. But Sarah Jane sees that Mr. Smith is still open with all the tracking data on, and he says that Luke told him to do it. And then Sarah Jane asks K9 what they were up to, and he's so logical that he basically reveals the info by saying, this is what I was told not to say. So Sarah Jane is a little bit annoyed that they poked into her private life, but then she says she was about to tell them all anyway, and reveals, I met this man, we're going on dates and whatnot. Ronnie pushes for where they met, but she amicably ends the discussion and sends the kids home. And she's acting all very smiley and mushy and in love, and she says, I should be angry at them for poking into my private life, but I'm not really. So Luke's getting ready for bed. She goes in to say goodnight to Luke, and she reminisces about in the past some men were interested, but she couldn't really have relationships with them because of her bizarre life. But she reveals that she met this man in a shoe shop, I think she said, and then she wasn't going to call him. But then she bumped into him again, and she decided that maybe it's time to stop cutting herself off from people so much. And the gang and, having all these kids come into her life has helped her realise that she doesn't need to keep it secret from absolutely everybody, and so maybe she can now apply that to romantic relationships. The man is called Peter, and she still doesn't know how she's going to go bringing up all the aliens and stuff to him, but she's sure that they'll probably figure it out. As Luke settles off to sleep, he hears the quite straining warp noise. He notices it, but he doesn't think too much of it. We get a 3 days later pop up on screen, which is rare, actually. Luke is getting ready to meet Peter. He's hoping that he looks okay. He's worrying about whether to call him Peter, or to call him Mr. Dalton, or to call him Dad, even. Peter Dalton sounds like a familiar name for me, but I don't know why. Maybe I've just stored it away in my head from when I originally watched this episode, but it sounds like it should be somebody else's name, somebody famous. The postman comes by and drops off a mysterious box, cardboard box with all fragile stickers all over it for Sarah Jane, just as Peter pulls up. Ronnie and Clyde have also popped over to be nosy and get a look at him. The box is a bit growly and rattly, so Ronnie takes it off Sarah Jane's hands. No idea what's in it. She brings it back to her house as Peter comes and gives Sarah Jane some flowers and says hi to Luke, and remarks that Sarah Jane's got an amazing house, and he's just altogether very lovely. Seems like a very nice man. Geeta spies Peter over the road, and she finds him quite handsome, and under the guise that she's just heading down to the shops and wants to know if they want anything, she goes over to say hello. She spots the flowers, and then very subtly, by which I mean not subtly at all, promotes her flower shop and says they do great displays for weddings, and Sarah Jane pretty much immediately shuts that thought down, which is funny, considering the title of the episode. Ronnie and Clyde look after this package, and they see it move around a bit, and then an ice stalk pops out of it. K9 pretty much immediately picks up on the alien activity, and then hovers himself down the stairs, which must be a trick that he's picked up from a Dalek or something like that. We don't actually see him hover, but we just hear him mentioning activating hover mode. The box explodes in a shower of packing peanuts, and out comes a Travast Polong, which was the alien that was in that hospital in Mark of the Berserker that Sarah Jane was trying to hunt down. It zooms out the room. Ronnie and Clyde run after it. Peter's talking to Luke by his car outside when K9 comes out the door, and Sarah Jane tries to get him to go back indoors and not let Peter spot him and just try and pretend that she's a nice, normal lady for once. But of course, K9 is locked onto this alien and trying to get him. It's too late. Peter sees K9, but Luke is able to brush it off as, oh, that's my toy, it's from Japan. It's just pre-programmed with some phrases that can talk, but yeah, it's just a toy. It's got a homing thing. It'll make its way back home. Robot dog, isn't it? Toys these days. And they just sort of usher Peter into the car and go, all right, we're going out to this restaurant. We're going to the Italian restaurant down the road, as Clyde, Ronnie, and K9 chase the Travaspo along down the road in the opposite direction. It looks like a big slug with many eyes on stalks, and it's fully CG. At the restaurant, Sarah Jane gets a call from Ronnie. They've caught the Travaspo along in a bin. They brought it up to the attic. Sarah Jane says, tell Mr. Smith to contact Polongus, which is the planet that it's from, and they'll teleport him home. That's what happens. She says that she bought it on eBay from an owner who didn't know what it was, so she was just going to teleport it back home herself, but of course it escaped. I imagine maybe in 2009 you probably could buy aliens on eBay. I think they've brought in some regulations since. And then Sarah Jane goes to rejoin Luke and Peter, who are getting along fine. They were talking among themselves, and they say that with being a journalist, Sarah Jane must want to know everything. So they pretend that they've hidden something from her. It's like, oh, what were you two talking about? Oh, nothing, it was nothing. And then she keeps digging for it, and she takes the bait, trying to find out what they were on about, and they find it very amusing. And then somebody walks by, and we get a wipe transition, and a 2 days later pop up. Clyde is being very nosy. He's looking up Peter's house online. He says to Ronnie that there's a for sale sign, and there's newspapers in the windows on a photo that was taken 3 weeks ago. So that's a bit suspicious. In the background, Ronnie is pouring 2 glasses of juice, and then she checks which one has more juice in it before setting them down for herself and Clyde, which is very cute. It's a beautiful little detail in the background. It's not even so much what she does, it's just the fact that she does it, that somebody has directed her to do that. They've written that out in the script, I imagine. And it's just so human. It really ties the show together. It's the little things like that. It was why I love the show, because sure, you're pouring juice and you want a little bit more to yourself. But to put it in the show, with all aliens, they've just chased an alien down the road, but they still act like proper human people and do little human things, and it's just so good. I love it. I love it so much. So Clyde suggests that they go and have a look at Peter's house. He knows Peter isn't an alien. He got K9 to scan him, but he thinks, well, maybe he wants to nick Sarah Jane's money because she's rich from her aunt's will. She's got this big house and all. Ronnie says, well, I doubt that because he's got a nice car. He's a high-earning lawyer, but they decide to go and check anyway. Sarah Jane and Peter are out on another date by themselves, and at this point, Peter confesses his love. And they've been seeing each other for just over a month now, because I think said she'd been sneaking out 5 times in the past month, and then it's been about a week now. It's been 2 days and then 3 days, so just over a month. And Sarah Jane confesses her love too. So we're cutting between them on the date and Ronnie and Clyde creeping into Peter's house through a window. They see that it's pretty empty inside. What is there is all wrapped up or covered with sheets. It's cold inside, so there's no heating on. There's a lot of unanswered posters all piling up in the doorway. Meanwhile, Peter proposes to Sarah Jane, and she accepts. Now, 1 month just over to say I love you. That's fine. For marriage, that's a bit hasty and a bit suspicious. In real life, maybe that happens, I give benefit of the doubt. But story-wise, there is a significance to how hasty this is. The engagement ring that Peter gives Sarah Jane is seen to glow red in a slightly sinister fashion. At the attic, Sarah Jane announces her engagement to Clyde and Ronnie, and they feel that they have to tell her about Peter's house. She seems a bit shocked, but then the ring glows, and she says, oh, no, it's fine. His firm got him a flat nearer the office. He's moved there. I've actually been there before. It's all fine. Nothing suspicious about this whatsoever. She says that she's not angry, really. She probably would have snuck in and done the same, but she apologizes for making them so suspicious that they felt that they had to do that. And so they say, when's the wedding? And she says, oh, it's the end of next week. And Clyde says, that is really fast. Mr. Smith detects the ring. He calls out that an anomaly has been detected, and Sarah Jane reveals that she's got a lever that she can just pull that shuts him down completely. Clyde starts protesting that he was trying to tell her something, but she takes off her scanner watch. She says the world is going to have to look after itself while she arranges this wedding, because just for once, she doesn't want anything getting in the way. I think that all this weird behaviour would hit a lot harder if we didn't know about the ring and didn't see it glow. The show really likes to do the dramatic irony where it shows the audience things that the characters don't know yet. But I think it makes it a bit weaker for it. I think it would be a lot weirder if suddenly Sarah Jane was going out with this man and then is getting married and then is shutting down all the alien stuff, and we're thinking, why? What is this just love? Is this just what happened? What is he controlling her? And we have no idea. But now we know that she's got the ring on. And sure, it's a kid's show, and it spells things out for you a little bit more. But I think kids can still pick up on people acting weird. So, I don't know, maybe, I think it's just that there's a thing this show likes to do, and I think it just makes it a little bit weaker for it. Luke's there, and he says, you haven't even told Peter about all the aliens and what we do. And she says, well, maybe I never will. Maybe I'm just going to have a nice life with him. And sure, we'll save the world and things, but I can just keep these separate, and he's something to go back to, and when I can switch off from it all. She gives custody of K9 to Clyde, and then they just sort of have to accept that this is what's happening now. As Sarah Jane switches off the attic light and locks the door, we hear a familiar laugh. The blackness of the attic fades to the blackness of Peter's suit, and we transition into 2 weeks later. I like these transitions. They make it a bit more interesting rather than just straight cutting from shot to shot. It just spices it up a bit. And a nice person walking past, you get a white transition. This one, you get the fade from scene to scene. It's just really nice. I appreciate them putting in the effort to get these shots in. Luke is holding a message from Maria that says that she can't make it. She's doing her exams. Her dad is very busy with work. Clyde mentions that his mum can't make it because of a clashing wedding. And the Brigadier can't make it because he's back in Peru. Nicholas Corney was actually going to be there, but unfortunately he'd had a stroke, so he couldn't make it. But it sort of makes the point that the wedding is so rushed that not a lot of people can actually turn up because it's just such short notice. Peter says that he doesn't have any family to turn up. He's the only one left of his family. Luke gets a little bit annoyed that Clyde is pushing this and going, "Oh, it's such short notice, eh, Peter? You weirdo, getting married so quickly. Yeah, kind of bizarre taking Sarah Jane away from all of us." There's a lot of that in his voice. And Clyde says, "Look, this is my mum's wedding. I want the day to be happy." And he says that just because Clyde's dad walked out on him, maybe Peter's not, is his dad. He's not going to be bad this time. It doesn't mean that all dads are bad. Clyde says he's not your dad, but Luke says, well, he's going to be. So Clyde, don't spoil this, because he's been getting along quite well with Peter as Luke. There's a few folk there. There's Sarah Jane's old editor, accountant, etc. Geeta and Haresh are there, and they're sort of remarking among themselves that it's a little bit of a sorry turnout. I start to wonder if we're ever going to see the repercussions of them knowing about the Jadoon. Maybe it'll pop up in the finale, but maybe there won't be any repercussions. They just met some aliens and the aliens went away, and that's how life is in this universe. Sarah Jane turns up in her wedding dress with Rani as a bridesmaid. Rani's wearing a very bright pink dress, actually. It's really quite bright. Luke's suit looks just a smidge too big on him, bless him. And Luke mentions that, he's the one giving Sarah Jane away and not the Doctor, but Sarah Jane says she wouldn't even know where to send the invite. Maybe Metabelus 3. That is the spider one. Stay away from that planet. Thank you. Don't even bring that up. That sends shivers right down my spine. And then we hear that warping sound again, and this time Rani is the one who notices, so we've got each of the kids noticing it now. Clyde has snuck K9 into the wedding. He's under the table. He's covered partially by the tablecloth. But he scans and all is normal. And as the registrar starts reading the vows, the warp grows louder till we get to speak now or forever hold your peace, when the 10th Doctor bursts in through the door, shouts, "Stop this wedding now!" which is an iconic line that was used in so many trailers for the Sarah Jane Adventures. Wind starts to blow inside. K9 spins in circles, detecting a lot of anomalies going on. And the Doctor starts to go blurry, as if they're overlaying video of him on top of himself, but a bit out of sync. He shouts for Sarah Jane to get away from Peter, but Peter holds her hands, telling her not to be afraid of the angel. And the trickster, who, of course, the laugh that we heard in the attic, dressed in white this time rather than his usual black, coalesces in the corner from a gas. The Doctor shouts at the trickster to let Sarah Jane go. He's still all blurry and wobbly. The trickster hisses, "Too late, Time Lord. You're mine, Sarah Jane Smith. Mine forever." The Doctor and Sarah Jane shout for each other as Sarah Jane, Peter, and the trickster do the opposite of coalescing, and they just form into a gas and disappear, and roll credits on part 1. That was so good. That was really, really good. I mean, of course, I'm so excited and hyped up of the 10th Doctor thing. It's the Doctor. It's a spin-off of the show. We've waited 2.5 series. We're in our 3rd series now, and the Doctor has finally appeared, and it's just brilliant. I love. He runs in. It's so iconic. Just stop this wedding now. It's beautiful. You need to watch this. If you want to watch an episode, watch this. It's so great, and I'm very, very excited for part 2. So we get our 13 Bannerman Road, we get our previously on, we roll the titles. It only takes a minute this time, and we kick right off where we left with 10 shouting, "Sarah!" With the trickster gone, the Doctor stops being blurry. Pulses of white energy sort of wash over the wedding guests, and they fade away, leaving only the gang with the Doctor. He shouts at them to hang on, everything goes white, and Luke awakens to find the Doctor looking at him, saying it's good to meet him in the flesh. I think we've had a Doctor Who series finale prior to this episode in which Luke appeared via video call, so he knows the Doctor. But Clyde and Rani are more wary, however, and they want to know how he knows their names. He's just so doctory. They immediately catch on that it's him, if Sarah Jane shouting "Doctor" at him wasn't enough. He's running around with his ear to the floor, and Rani says that she hopes he's as good as she's heard. And he says, well, journalists, they always exaggerate, but yeah, I'm pretty amazing on a good day. And it's so nice to have an episode with the 10th Doctor in it that I am less familiar with, so that I can just sit back and watch it happen. And I know I said, I just think we had a series finale with Luke in, and I can't really remember. But as I watch those Doctor Who episodes, they come back to me, whereas this one feels more fresh and new, and I'm not sure what's going to happen next. It's beautiful. His energy, he's just a constant stream of consciousness from brain to mouth, and he's running around. It's all chaos, and it's brilliant to watch. The Doctor is very happy to see K9. K9 wants to know where Sarah Jane is. They all look out the window, and they just see pure white. And the Doctor says that it's a dimensional shift. Time has moved on, but the building and the gang have just been left behind. We pull the camera out of the window to a 3D model of the venue. It's not really a church. It's just a wedding venue and there's a bit of ground that it sits on, and then just nothing else in this big white void. The gang has many, many questions, so they're all talking at once. So the Doctor pulls one of them wooden football rattle things, you spin it round and it goes to the sound and shuts everyone up. And he says that the Trickster did this, but he's going to get everybody back safe. They can go and use the TARDIS. Just checks that everybody knows what a TARDIS is, and then runs downstairs or he runs out the room to where the TARDIS is. The whole building kind of loops round. We'll see this in a minute. But he runs outside to where the TARDIS is, and the TARDIS has disappeared. And then we hear it struggling to materialise again, and it sort of fades in, but not quite fully, and it's all wibbly with blurry, spiky edges. K9 says that a temporal schism is preventing materialisation. I think the last time I heard temporal schism was when character options had made up their own sonic screwdriver, and they called it like the trans-temporal sonic screwdriver or something, and I wondered if there was an episode that I've missed. But they just completely made it up. The TARDIS completely disappears again, and K9 says that they are currently in nowhere and no when. The Doctor tells them to all take a look at the clock, which is just repeating the same second over and over. There's a TV in the background with a horse race on in some other room. It's just looping, the horses jumping this hurdle over and over and over, and they see that they are stuck in 23 seconds, past 23 minutes, past 3 p.m, constantly looping. So Close says, "Where's Sarah Jane gone then?" And the Doctor says, "I think she's right here." And we cut to her waking up on the floor like Luke did. She is with Peter in her own version of the venue with all the way outside, so she's probably trapped with just him in a different second. She's very confused. Peter says it's all okay, and her ring flashes red, and he pulls out the actual wedding ring, as opposed to the red, sinister engagement ring. And he says, "All you need to do is say I do." And Sarah Jane doesn't say I do. She wonders where the Doctor is and calls out for him, and finally notices this engagement ring, rather, that she's been wearing for a couple of weeks, glows red. She pulls it off her finger, throws it away. Back with the gang, Ronnie suggests that they've been trapped here perhaps as hostages. The Doctor explains who the Trickster is, explains that he exists to wreak havoc. The Doctor gets a signal on a sonic screwdriver, and he tries locking onto Sarah Jane. We cut back to her, and she says that Peter was just using her as his puppet, with this hypnosis ring that just makes her not notice it when everything is really suspicious and weird. But he says it was just to prevent anyone who would stop them being happy, because the angel told me that people would try and stop us being happy, and he gave me this ring to give to you so we could be happy together. Sarah Jane realizes, of course, the angel is the Trickster, and Peter is his newest victim. She runs out the room to try and find the Doctor, and Rani feels her walk over a grave. They've stood in the same spot. The gang all hear Sarah Jane calling out. The Doctor and K9 are trying to isolate her time trace. The Doctor calls out Sarah, and then Ronnie says she doesn't like it. She prefers Sarah Jane, but the Doctor's like, "Oh well, she doesn't mind when I call her Sarah." And of course, that's the whole point. He is the only one who is allowed to do that. And Peter is just following after Sarah Jane, saying, "Well, I want to tell you about the angel. I was visited by this angel, and he's going to make sure that we're happy." Of course. Now, the angel is the Trickster, so he's got this creepy face with no eyes and very sharp teeth. But, I mean, angels in the Bible are all like a big, weird, massive eyes, and they have to say, "Be not afraid," because they're just bizarre, scary monsters, so fair enough. Sarah Jane runs off upstairs and seems to appear back in the same room that she was just in, where the wedding was, because the building loops around. Peter is, of course, in there because he's basically stayed in the same place, and she's managed to loop back around to him. The Doctor can hear that she's gone upstairs, so he takes Clyde and Rani and leaves Luke and K9 downstairs to see if the TARDIS comes back. Apparently, for David Tennant, running up those stairs and saying to Clyde and Rani, which I believe their actor and actress are Daniel Anthony and Anjali Mahindra, he says something like, "Come along, spit spot," or something like that. Apparently, that was the last scene that he ever filmed till he came back for Day of the Doctor, because this was done after his last episode, even though that was yet to air. Sarah Jane is still thinking that Peter tried to control her, even though she's twigged that it's the trickster. It's a little bit weird like that. But she says that she was worried about the secrets that she was keeping from him, but he was hiding something even bigger. And he says he was working from home, and he fell down the stairs, and we cut to the scene, and we see a stuntman doing a very impressive roll right down those stairs. And he thought that he was going to die when the angel appeared to him and offered him life and even the true love that he always longed for, just if he gave his agreement. Sarah Jane says, no, the trickster is an alien who tricked you. And Peter says, but the ring was just meant to protect you, and the trickster said it was. And I know maybe it controls you now, but you confessed your love to me before I gave you the ring. So that must have been true. And Sarah Jane admits that it was, and they do actually love each other, and they embrace. The Doctor, Rani, and Clyde run through the door back into the room because it loops round, but in their version, of course, nobody is there. We cut back to Sarah Jane, who says that it's time to say the things that she never told Peter, and that this is her life, and she deals with aliens, and she's fought the trickster before, and he has used her parents against her, and he has used her friends against her, and now he is using Peter. But Peter says, but he saved my life. What is wrong about this? What's the downside? What is the negative effects of me being able to continue living and to marry somebody that I love? And Sarah Jane calls out for the trickster and basically summons him into the room. And he's there, and of course is being all very sinister and just says, I only want you to be happy. With his creepy, hissing, horrible voice. He's such a good villain. I love him so much. Rani is even questioning what the trickster would get out of them being married. Sarah Jane is asking this simultaneously. We get a sort of shot of that. And the trickster shows Sarah Jane a future where they get married, and then all the alien stuff gets cleared out of the attic, and they start living happily ever after and not hunting aliens anymore. And that's the life that Peter wants. And he's saying, that's, all you need to do is say I do, and we'll be able to live this happily ever after life. And the trickster says, if you don't say I do, then you're going to stay here forever in this void for eternity. And Sarah Jane says, well, so be it. And the trickster says, and also your friends, and your family, Luke and Rani and Clyde and K9 and the Doctor are going to be trapped in their own void for eternity. The trickster now appears to the gang in his original black. We get a close-up of his teeth, which are very creepy, but you can kind of see the real actor's teeth behind them. They're very straight. He's got very nice teeth hidden behind these horrible pointy things. And the Doctor addresses the trickster and says he knows the legends of the Pantheon of Discord to which the trickster belongs. And he's fought the shadows and changelings, but didn't think they'd actually meet. And then the trickster says, well, I know the legends of the Doctor. And we get some references to past episodes, even old Who, where they say you held the key of time or something, which I think was something the Fourth Doctor did. And the Doctor says, well, you look very lonely for a pantheon. And the trickster says, I embody multitudes, which is fancy. And the trickster says, the gate is waiting for you, Doctor, which is a reference to his final episode that has been filmed but is not yet aired. And the Doctor asks, what do you want with Sarah Jane? And he says, I want her agreement. And then he vanishes. And then the Doctor cottons on that if she agrees to marry Peter, she'll live a new life and she'll forget all about the aliens and saving the world and leave it to fall into chaos, which is exactly what the trickster wants. The TARDIS materializes within the wall of this room. Luke runs in, asking what's going on. The wall crackles with Artron energy, which the Doctor says they can use against the trickster. He manages to get inside the TARDIS, but everybody else starts going blurry, and the Doctor reaches out for Clyde and grabs his hand, but ultimately lets go, and Clyde falls against the TARDIS door and gets zapped with the energy, and then the TARDIS disappears, leaving the gang behind, and the Doctor and the TARDIS gone. Luke says, okay, well, I'm going to wait in this room this time for him to return. And Clyde and Ronnie run downstairs to see K9. And K9 confirms that the Archeron energy is effective against many time-based life forms, which is when Clyde spots that he's fallen against this door, and now he has this energy crackling around his hand, which means he stands a chance against the trickster. Sarah Jane is trying to convince Peter that agreeing to marry him is exactly what the trickster wants, so it leaves Earth vulnerable. Rani is trying to stop Clyde from facing the trickster, but Clyde opens up the doors, summons the trickster, calls out his name. He appears in black in the void. He's got to be in black, otherwise he'd be in white and he'd just look like a floating head, because the void is all white. And Clyde says, I wish to serve the Pantheon of Discord, but the trickster dismisses him, says, you are of no importance. But he reaches out, he grabs the trickster's hand, zaps him. It appears to be very painful for both of them, but the trickster significantly more so. He's all doubled over and shouting. The TARDIS is struggling, it's really struggling, but it just about materializes to Sarah Jane and Peter. Sarah Jane asks what she can do, because if she says no, then she gets trapped here forever, and so does everybody else. If she says yes, then she condemns the world to the trickster. It's a lose-lose situation. And the Doctor opens the door of the TARDIS, obviously, and he looks at Sarah Jane and says, you have fought the trickster before. You know how he can be defeated. And then he looks to Peter and says, Peter, I know you are a good man, and I am so sorry. And then a crackling and fizzing Clyde and the trickster coalesce in the room. The TARDIS disappears again. Clyde collapses on the floor. And Sarah Jane turns to Peter and explains how the trickster works. He comes to people who are about to die, and the trickster's lying there on the floor weakly saying, she's lying. And Sarah Jane figures out that he never let her see his house because he was dead. He didn't fully exist yet. The deal was the trickster would only fully give him his life back once he'd married Sarah Jane. And he is still trying to come to terms with how it can be so wrong to save a life. But Sarah Jane holds Clyde, who's there unconscious on the floor, and says, this is what will happen. I mean, I think she thinks he's dead, because he says the trickster will destroy countless lot more lives unless you break this deal, Peter, because unfortunately it's a tragedy, but you were meant to die when you fell down those stairs. And he's quite selfless about it. He's quite noble. And he says, you know, it's his death, but he's not worried about him dying. But he knows that Sarah Jane loves him, and he doesn't want her to be alone. And she says, I do love you, but you need to do this for me, for our love. And they're very tearful, and there's always a huge element of tragedy to these stories. We know how they work. This is the third trickster story now. Somebody has to accept their death to put the world back on track, which is a huge thing to witness in a kids show. And it's really what makes these stories so good. Peter turns to the trickster, who is now desperate, just showing his true colours, saying, you don't have the strength to accept death, that's why I chose you. And he says that Sarah Jane gave him the strength, and he takes off his wedding ring, says that he withdraws his agreement, throws the ring at the trickster, who vanishes with a shout of no. It's all very dramatic, and I enjoy it an awful lot. And Peter turns to Sarah Jane and accepts now that he must go. He says, I wish I always knew you. I love you, Sarah Jane Dalton. And then he fades away. And Sarah Jane bursts into tears over Clyde's unconscious body as the Doctor and Luke and Rani run in. The Doctor puts his arms around Sarah Jane, comforts her. K9 trundles up to them. They all huddle together and hold on to each other as everything shakes, and the white energy pulses over them, and it all goes white again. And we see the venue returns back to its normal place, and we hear the registrar again, and all the wedding guests are sitting there in the room, very confused, wondering what just happened, where Peter's gone. The gang are sitting there wondering where the Doctor has gone. What was any of that even real? What's happened? K9 confirms that it was. Luke walks up to a very tearful Sarah Jane, who just announces, I'm sorry, but the wedding is cancelled, and walks out. We go back to the attic. We see Sarah Jane sitting with K9, and then she calls for Mr. Smith, and he activates with no fanfare. And the gang comes in and asks Sarah Jane if she's okay, and she says, well, I've got all of you, so I will be okay. The Doctor going and disappearing is nothing new, as both Mr. Smith and K9 detect the temporal flux is escalating and the TARDIS appears in the attic, and the Doctor opens the door. And Rani asks if they can go and have a look in the TARDIS, and he acts all angry. What, in my TARDIS? Yeah, of course you can. And of course they can. They all bundle in. And man, I have missed that TARDIS set. I'm not fond of Jodie's TARDIS. I wasn't particularly fond of the 12th Doctor's TARDIS. The 11th Doctor's first TARDIS, adore that one. Adore the chaos of this one, but this is like second best. It's got all these wires hanging down from the ceiling, great big central console, all these weird panels all across it, all the roundels, big weird coral-like structures. It's brilliant. It's a weird spaceship. Of course, it's bigger on the inside. Clyde gets to say that classic line. The Doctor says, Sarah Jane, all the things that you have done are pretty impressive, but they are nothing compared to what you will do. And the kids ask for a trip in the TARDIS, but Sarah Jane says, well, Clyde and Ronnie, you are grounded by the Judoon, so I'm afraid you're not allowed. They pop back into the attic and give Sarah Jane a moment with the Doctor. And she asks if that's the last time that she'll see him. He says, well, I don't know, but I hope not. And he asks her not to forget him, and she says, nobody's ever going to forget you. And then she steps out and the TARDIS dematerializes, and we roll the credits. And I am pretty speechless after that one. I think it was elevated to excellent heights by the Doctor. It didn't quite get me emotional like the one with Sarah Jane's parents did. That's the only thing I have to say. Unfortunately, I didn't connect with Peter and his death in quite the same way, but I enjoyed it so much. It is such a good episode. I look very, very forward to more. The next one is a haunted house, which I really don't remember. So I look forward to that, and I hope that you do too. I will see you then. Bye-bye.